So someone said to me the other day, "You sure rag on the N64 and its games a lot. I bet you think the Neo Geo and all its titles are just awesome. You would never say a bad word about the Neo Geo." Well, challenge accepted. The truth is, like any other console out there are some pretty terrible games for the Neo Geo, and today I'm going to warn you about my top 5. So before we get into it here, this is a personal list. I have opinions on why I think these games are brutal. You may or may not share those same opinions, but for me, the recurring theme for these games are simply the lack of fun and overall disappointment factor. So for example, I know quite a few SNK fans don't like SVC Chaos. It's a quote bad game from a mechanic standpoint. I'm not great at fighting games, I'm pretty much a casual, but I still enjoy the artwork in this game. I like seeing SNK's take on Capcom characters, and I have fun when I play it. So that's not the type of bad game that I'm talking about. I'm talking about real drudgery here, the stuff that will make you question how this shit was ever worthy of being developed for some of the greatest hardware available in the arcades at the time. Number 5, King of Monsters. Yeah, I know some of you are already disappointed. If it makes you feel better, I think this is probably the most controversial one in the video. I think where this one really fails for me is in that disappointment category that I mentioned earlier. The concept at face value sounds awesome. Choose a monster and battle it out wrestling style with Japanese cities as your ring. That's enough to get anyone excited, but then you actually start playing the game. Controls are pretty basic: punch, kick, run, and jump. You can of course grapple with your opponent and do some normal wrestling things like body slams and pile drivers, but it's ultimately just not much fun. The city is there for you to interact with, but it plays a minimal part in the actual game, which is to simply just beat the hell out of the other monster and then pin him for a 3 count. Maybe if the city were integrated more into the gameplay strategy, things would be better, but as it stands, it's just a monotonous button mashing session with average animation and a premise that gets old really fast. Back when the King of Monsters movie came out, I played through this game and was going to do a tie-in video with the film. I was so bored, there was just so little to talk about outside of the game's premise that I ended up scrapping the entire video because I just couldn't be bothered to waste any more time on this game. If you manage to beat this, or hell, last more than 10 minutes playing it and aren't questioning if this is punishment for some sin you committed in the past, consider yourself fortunate. Alright, that was just number 5. Put the pitchforks away. I think we're going to find some common ground here. Let's see what's next. Number 4, Riding Hero. A lot of you know I already dislike this game. I took a small swing at it back when I did the underrated games video. The racing genre isn't totally absent on Neo Geo, but this had the idea of bringing motorcycle racing to SNK's iconic hardware. The racing mixed with some RPG elements would have been a cool idea if it weren't for the fact that the gameplay is terrible. Riding Hero looks a lot like Sega's Hang-On, which may be a compliment if this game hadn't come out 5 years after Hang-On. It just seems like a really worn game to have unleashed on the Neo Geo, even for 1990. Hang-On also had cooler arcade controls going for it, and as most of you know, aside from irritating maze, Neo only ever had stick controls. Why SNK even bothered releasing a dated racer that players were forced to use a standard joystick for is beyond me. The game just isn't very fun. It's pretty unforgiving as far as its difficulty goes. One good wipeout and you can expect to be dusted by all the other racers. It's actually fairly easy to catch up, but then you'll quickly find yourself crashed and in the same position again. This nonsense repeats again and again, in part due to there being no on-screen map to help guide you in knowing what type of turns you have coming up. There's a story mode for this, which adds a slightly more interesting RPG element to it, but it's certainly not enough to warrant making you put up with the mundanity of a game that was already dated, even by the standards of the early 90s. Number 3 on the worst list is Fight Fever. Now look, you guys know I'm a casual when it comes to fighting games, but like I mentioned in the opening, games like SVC Chaos and other fighters on the Neo still have appeal to me for things like animation, artwork, creative backgrounds, and just general fun. Well, Fight Fever has none of that. Even as someone who can find simple joys in fighting games and appreciate them without getting overly involved in their mechanics, Fight Fever somehow manages to be disappointing. Right out of the gate, that mood is set with some of the most boring characters to comprise a game's roster that I can think of. Yeah, here's your generic Ryu guy and the yin to his yang, Ken, or Kim I should say. I hate to bring up dates again, but this slop landed in the summer of '94. The much superior King of Fighters '94 would be out just a few months later, but if you really want to put this shit to shame, consider that Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo came out before this did. I hate its graphics, I hate its overall art style, I hate the gameplay, which is nothing more than really 4 attack buttons and everyone gets a projectile. I hate the mostly generic characters. The music is average, I guess, but not memorable, and overall I just hate that this listless lemming litter was even made into an MVS cartridge. Whew, and now we're working our way to the real dumpster fires, the SNK the trash is now kind of shit. And speaking of, something that is a true number 2, yeah, you heard all about this one, I'm sure. There's no sugarcoating it, it sucks and it sucks real bad. I picked this up somewhat later while collecting, hearing the stories but still thinking in my mind that it wasn't as bad as everyone was making it out to be. Well, it's probably worse. I commented on choppy animation a few times already, but this one really sinks to new lows. At least those other titles tried. This is just downright embarrassing considering the hardware. The game makes use of 2 of the 4 buttons and then shows you how to throw different types of punches by pushing different directions on the stick. That's just not ideal at all for a game where you're asked to move around in a boxing ring. At the very least, they could have minimized some of this by assigning C and D to other actions. The only thing that really says Neo Geo to me about this game is the large character sprites, which also look terrible. They're tall and wooden looking, which I don't know. I'm going to be honest, I don't know the source material all that well to know if this is a nod to that or not, but it doesn't translate well at all to a video game. It's awkward as f***. This is also one of the few games on this list where I'd also criticize the music. It spawns feelings inside of me that I haven't had to contend with since being forced to listen to Enya on a 9-hour road trip well over a decade ago. These tracks are terrible, and they're even worse when you add in the constant sound effects from punching. In short, there is nothing redeeming about this game. It's not fun, there isn't much strategy, it's not nice to look at, you definitely don't want to listen to it, and the controls are abysmal. This thing should be flushed rather than played. So what's worse than that embarrassing assembly of ones and zeros that cost some unfortunate gamer $200 back in the day? I mean, imagine that. Spending $200, closer to $400 today, on Legend of Suck-Ass Joe. I absolutely despise this game. This might be one of those more rare scenarios where nostalgia kind of works in reverse. A while back when I first started getting into Neo Geo, this game was cheap and I took a chance on it because of, well, that, and the fact that it was a sports title, and it was Neo Geo. How bad could it really be? If it's not obvious, the most disappointing thing about this right away, especially after some kick-ass robo animations that make you think you might be in for something cool like Super Baseball 2020, but no, you're basically given a spectator seat viewpoint from the sideline. Essentially, you move your players left to right, and yeah, they jump I suppose, hooray for some pseudo Y-axis implementation. But really, I was stunned when I realized this was it for the game. Just this basic viewpoint, go east or go west, that's it. Hell, even the black box volleyball game on Nintendo allowed your players to move north and south on the court. What kind of garbage is this? Although simplistic, I won't knock the graphics too hard, and the animations in this are, well, they're actually not great, but they're acceptable. But it's the gameplay, the most important part of any title. The gameplay is just atrocious. Pretty much everything is done with the A button, and then you have your left and right movement with the stick for controls. I'm not going to get into the details and some of the additional special serves and spikes, this isn't a review, but I will note that all of this becomes frustratingly more challenging when you're dealing with a camera that pans back and forth. There are many times when you can't see your player in the backcourt, but that's the one you need to control when the computer goes up for a spike. This guessing exercise plays out in other scenarios as well and makes a game with a shitty viewpoint and simplistic controls even less appealing than it already is. I really hate this game. I hate that I wasted money on it, I hate that I tried to like it and wasted time playing it, I hate its shitty camera and unforgiving timing, and I really hate that this is a Neo Geo game at all. It's probably the real true crime here. The levels of disappointment and ability to create apathy when I should be excited about something will forever be burned in my memory. This game stands out as one of my true negative memories of the Neo Geo, and for that I will never forgive this pile of shit. I felt good to get that off my chest. I really needed to vent. I just hate Power Spikes 2. It has no business being a Neo Geo game. Even its name is just thoughtless and terrible. I find it to be the total opposite of fun. What did you think about the list here? This is my personal top 5 worst games on the Neo Geo. Feel free to drop your own 5 in the comments below. I'm thinking of 2 honorable mentions that easily could have made this list as well. One I allowed to escape due to pure nostalgia. It's not a launch title, but it came out the same year the MVS hit arcades, and I'll see if anyone mentions it. As always, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.